Welcome back to Lesson 10 of our video study of the book of Daniel. Chapters 10 through 12 comprise a single vision. Its division into 3 chapters is artificial at best and confusing at worst. Chapter 10 records certain events leading up to the main message of the vision, which is contained in chapter 11. Chapter 12 contains an epilogue to the vision and Daniel's response to it. But the division of these chapters, which dates back only to the 13th century AD, is awkward and unnatural. The first verse of chapter 11 seems to belong with the material contained in chapter 10, and the first 4 verses of chapter 12 seem to belong with the material in chapter 11. So, as we study these final 3 chapters of the book, we're going to divide the material according to these more logical literary sections rather than following the traditional chapter divisions. Nevertheless, these chapters do bring the series of visions that began in chapter 7 to a logical and appropriate conclusion. Chapter 7, the vision of the 4 beasts, lays down the broad historical context of the last days of God's exclusive relationship with the Israelite people under the terms of the Mosaic covenant. Chapter 8, the vision of the ram and the goat, describes the moral and spiritual corruption of the Jews under Hellenism and their punishment through the blasphemous atrocities of Antiochus Epiphanes. Chapter 9, the vision of the 70 weeks, forecasts the Jews' wholesale rejection of their Messiah and the subsequent desolation of the Jewish nation and temple. Chapters 10 through 12, the vision of the exalted man, guarantee the ultimate vindication and deliverance of the faithful minority through the final decline and fall of the Jewish commonwealth and the establishment of the kingdom of the Messiah. Chapter 10 begins with a general introduction to the vision, written in the third person. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar, and the message was true and one of great conflict. But he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. The vision and message contained in these chapters is dated to the 3rd year of Cyrus of Persia. Cyrus became king of the Persians in 550 BC. However, if we assume that Daniel means the 3rd year of Cyrus's reign over the Jews, which seems to be a logical conclusion, the year of this vision would have been about 536 BC. That would be about 3 years after the vision of the 70 weeks. And it was in that year that the restored Jewish community in Jerusalem finished rebuilding the foundations of the temple and the altar of burnt offerings and resumed the daily sacrifices required by the law of Moses. The dating of this vision, according to the reign of Cyrus the Persian, rather than Darius the Mede, as in chapter 9, probably means that the aged Darius has died, and the province of Babylon has now come under the direct rule of Cyrus. This introduction declares that the message delivered to Daniel through the vision was a true message. That is, it was not a message about what might happen, but about what absolutely would happen. The only other information we're given about the message in this introduction is that it concerned the coming of great conflict or warfare. At this point, the narrative switches to the first person, as Daniel writes his own prelude to the vision, describing what he has been doing in the days leading up to it. In those days, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. I did not eat any tasty food, nor did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed. Daniel had obviously been in great distress. He had been fasting for 3 weeks, like a person mourning for the dead. He neglected his personal glooming, again like someone in deep mourning. Now, while Daniel doesn't tell us the reason for his distress, the timing of it may give us a clue. We have already noted that the rebuilding of the foundations of the temple and the altar of burnt offering were completed in the same year that Daniel received this vision, that is 536 BC. But at that point, fierce opposition to the reconstruction of the temple from the foreigners who had lived in the land since the exile eventually led to a cessation of the work, as we read about in Nehemiah 4. As it turned out, the temple would not be completed for another 20 years. So we might speculate that Daniel's state of depression and mourning was brought on by the interruption of the reconstruction of the temple. Well, let's continue with our reading. On the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a tumult. Now I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, while the men who were with me did not see the vision. Nevertheless, a great dread fell on them, and they ran away to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision. Yet no strength was left in me, for my natural color turned to a deathly pallor, and I retained no strength. But I heard the sound of his words, and as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. At the end of his 3-week fast, Daniel is visited by a being who looks like a man, but who clearly possesses supernatural qualities. He is dressed like a king, or perhaps a priest. His physical description suggests the attributes of divinity. There's unapproachable glory and a thunderous voice that suggests all-encompassing wisdom, power, and authority. This mysterious visitor matches in remarkable detail the description of the ascended and glorified Christ as he appeared to the Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos in Revelation chapter 1. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to this idea in a few minutes. Understandably, Daniel was terror-stricken by the appearance of this heavenly personage, whom we will call the Exalted Man. Daniel's companions who were with him didn't actually see the vision, but there was something about the situation that caused them to be filled with an ominous dread, and they ran away and hid themselves. But Daniel didn't run away, perhaps because he was weakened by his advanced age or his extended fast. But whatever the reason, Daniel was left alone to hear the words of this strange visitor. And when the Exalted Man began to speak, the sound of his voice was so powerful and terrifying that Daniel literally fainted. Then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said to me, "O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I am about to tell you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you." And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 20 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future." The Exalted Man revived Daniel with a touch of his hand, assuring him that he had come with a message for one who was highly esteemed by God. Daniel had nothing to fear. Then the man explained that his appearance to Daniel had been delayed, And the explanation of this delay may have been clear enough to Daniel, but it's something of a mystery to us. The delay that he spoke of may refer to the 3-week period when Daniel was fasting and praying, but receiving no answer. The exalted man assured Daniel that his prayer had been heard on the first day that you set your heart on understanding. That is the day that his fast began. And again, we're not told precisely what Daniel was struggling to understand, but we can speculate that it had to do with the interruption of the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. How could God allow his glorious work to be stopped and his marvelous promises to be frustrated by evil pagans? But from the time that Daniel's prayer was heard until the exalted man appeared to him with an answer was an agonizing 21 days of silence. The explanation for the delay is, for me, the most difficult part of this chapter to understand. The exalted man explained that his arrival had been delayed because the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days, which was, by the way, the exact duration of Daniel's fast. However, with the help of Michael, one of the chief princes, the exalted man had either overcome the opposition or perhaps been relieved of his role in the conflict and has now arrived to deliver God's answer to Daniel's prayer. So, are we to understand here that an agent of God himself was literally so tied up in a conflict with an agent of Satan that he couldn't get away to come to Daniel in a timely manner? Well, this much we can say for certain about the cosmic struggle described in verse 13. First, it paralleled the struggle that Daniel had been going through, not just during the 3 weeks of his fast, but for his entire life. Everywhere he turned, at every stage of his life, it seemed that the cause of righteousness was being frustrated by the opposing forces of evil. However, verse 13, despite the questions it raises, does declare that the righteous are not left to wage their battles against evil alone. They have the help and support of powerful heavenly forces. But whether or not this passage should be understood as a more or less literal description of how the conflict between good and evil is waged in heaven, that will have to remain an open question for now. But we will come back to it presently. Now that Daniel knows the nature of the message that the exalted man is bringing to him, he's not sure that he really wants to hear it. When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. And behold, one who resembled a human being was touching my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who was standing before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? As for me, there remains just now no strength in me, nor has any breath been left in me. Then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. He said, O man of high esteem, do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous. Now as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. This wasn't Daniel's first rodeo, so to speak, with visits from heavenly messengers. But there was something about this messenger that frightened and amazed him as never before. And he didn't know if he was strong enough or worthy enough to hear what this messenger had to say. But the exalted man urged him to be strong. Let his soul be at peace. And then he touched Daniel again and imparted divine strength to him. Now Daniel is ready to listen. And with that, the message begins. Then he said, Do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I'm going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writings of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces, except Michael your prince. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. The exalted man has already told Daniel that his message concerns the future. And here when he says, I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia, so I'm going forth, he seems to be saying that the Persian dominion over God's people will last for a while longer yet. And this may give us a little more insight into the nature of the conflict between Michael and the prince of the Persian kingdom in verse 13. Perhaps the answer to the question we left hanging a few minutes ago is that the imagery of the celestial battle between the exalted man and the prince of Persia is a paradigm of the struggles of the Jewish people under the dominion of the Persian Empire. And the fact that the exalted man will go forth from this encounter with Daniel to return to fight against Persia may be a way of saying that the Persian rule of the Jews will continue for some time yet, which it did. And then when he says, behold, the prince of Greece is about to come, he seems to be forecasting the eventual conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great. And we must remember that the year of this vision is 536 BC. And Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire didn't occur until about 332. So when the exalted man says that the prince of Greece is about to come, he didn't mean tomorrow. He meant in about 200 years. From Daniel's point of view, this really wasn't very good news. In his own lifetime, he had seen the Jewish people released from Babylonian dominion only to come under the thumb of Persia. Now he hears that Persian rule will eventually come to an end only to be followed by that of Greece. Whereas Daniel might have hoped for the eventual restoration of an independent and powerful Israelite kingdom under the rule of the descendant of David who is called the Messiah, all he had been promised is continued subjection of the Jewish people to foreign rulers with no end in sight. But the exalted man says, in effect, wait, there's more. I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Before this undesirable chain of events even begins, Daniel will be shown the final outcome. The writing of truth in this case doesn't seem to refer to the scriptures. Rather, it refers to God's sovereign plan that is being implemented in the events that will be described as the vision continues. A peek into the writing of truth will make it patently clear that God is firmly in control of human history and that the forces of evil are only tools in his hand. What is contained in the writing of truth is the subject of chapter 11. Now, I'm including the first verse of chapter 11 in this presentation because I do believe that it is an integral part of it. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. The reason I think this verse belongs in chapter 10 is that if we read it as the first verse of chapter 11, it's left standing alone like a literary orphan. It has nothing to do with the rest of that chapter, which is primarily concerned with two of the Greek empires that emerged from the conquest of Alexander the Great and their impact on the fortunes of the Jews. And furthermore, it would mean that the exalted man arose to be an encouragement and protection to Darius the Mede. All we know about Darius is that he allowed himself to be tricked into throwing Daniel to the lions. There is nothing we know about him that merited or even required encouragement and protection from the exalted man. But if we read the verse as the completion of the thought of chapter 10 and verse 21, the whole picture changes. In 10:21, after assuring Daniel that the certain outcome of the struggle between good and evil in the world is written in the writing of truth, the exalted man says, "Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael your prince." Here again, we see the alliance or cooperation between Michael and the exalted man of Daniel's vision. And if 11 and verse 1 completes that thought, it means that the exalted man's encouragement and protection is meant for Michael, not for Darius the Mede. If this is the correct understanding of 11 and 1, it tells us volumes about the identity of the exalted man and his relationship to Michael. In chapter 10, verse 13, the exalted man tells Daniel that Michael came to help him in his conflict with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. But now in 11 and verse 1, it makes it clear that it is the exalted man, not Michael, who is the senior partner in this alliance. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I, that is the exalted man, arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him, that is Michael. What we seem to be hearing here is that in the edict of Cyrus, authorizing the return of the Jewish exiles to their homeland, God had inaugurated his master plan for redeeming his people, and Michael had been his chosen agent for executing it. So, does that mean that the exalted man of Daniel's vision is actually God? I believe it does. Remember, there was something about this exalted man that set him apart from Gabriel and the other heavenly messengers who had visited Daniel in the past. None of those had affected the paralyzing fear and amazement that overcame him in his encounter with the exalted man. And furthermore, given the striking similarity between the descriptions of the exalted man in verses 5 and 6 and of the risen and glorified Christ in Revelation 1, verses 13 to 15, I believe that what we have here just might be an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ, God the Word, personally narrating this final vision of the book of Daniel. Well, chapter 10 is admittedly difficult to interpret with absolute certainty regarding its details. However, in the big picture, I believe we can discern a lesson of great importance to Daniel and to us. Here, in what must have been the twilight of Daniel's long life, we see a man in deep depression. His hopes and expectations of a glorious future lying just over the horizon for his people are dashed when the exalted man tells him that the Jews' subjection to foreign powers will continue far into the foreseeable future. To the eye of those who do not really know or understand God, the events of history may bring the goodness, the power, or even the existence of God into question. It may appear that the forces of evil have a never-ending stranglehold on political, economic, and military power in the world of mankind. However, as the exalted man explained to Daniel, there is more to human history than what meets the eye. And in the final 2 chapters of the book of Daniel, the exalted man will open the pages of the Word of Truth, revealing in remarkable detail just how God will direct the course of history to bring about a glorious salvation for his people, far beyond anything that Daniel could have asked or imagined.
You will reign.